When a soul grows up untouched by love, it doesn't forget. It quietly turns into a shadow that follows us through every moment of life. Have you ever wondered what happens to a soul that was never truly touched by love? How does a heart grow that never truly felt seen? I'm here for you and for nothing else. Does the absence of affection in childhood just disappear? Or does it become a ghost that walks with us throughout life? It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men, said Frederick Douglass. But what happens when we weren't built with affection, but with silence, absence, and a constant need to prove that we deserve to exist? This video isn't just about childhood, it's about you, about the emptiness you sometimes feel, even when everything seems fine, about that nameless fatigue, that knot in your chest when someone is too kind, about the feeling that you have to do more, be more, give more, because deep down there's still a voice saying, I'm not enough. All of us, at some point, have felt outside of life, like a child looking through a window on a cold night, watching others gathered around the fire, laughing, belonging. This script is an invitation not to return to the past with anger, but to look at it with compassion, to understand that that lack wasn't a weakness. It was a deep yearning for something that never arrived. Today, we're going to explore what it means to grow up without love. Not the theoretical, distant, formal kind of love, but living love. The kind that takes your hand even when you can't say what you feel. We're going to walk the paths of neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy, not as academics, but as survivors of absence. If you're here, that's already a sign. You survived. Now you might be ready for something even harder, to truly live, to feel, to trust, to receive. But first, we need to understand what happens when a child grows up without love. Imagine a house. The windows are closed, but not for safety, for disinterest. The door never opens to greet you with a hug, and the silence inside is not peace, it's absence. There may be no screaming, perhaps no violence, but there are also no eyes that seek yours, no arms that wrap around you, just the muffled sound of a childhood that nobody truly saw. There are pains that scream, and there are pains that whisper so low that they blend with the ambient noise of life. Growing up without love isn't always a visible trauma. Sometimes it's just the averted gaze of a distracted mother, the absent touch of an exhausted father. It's having food on the table, a roof over your head, but cold in your heart, a kind of invisible abandonment. You learn early not to bother, not to need, to smile when you're sad, because even crying seems like too much. You learn to hide inside yourself, and what should have been childhood becomes emotional survival. And then a silent idea begins to infiltrate, like mold in the walls of the mind. I don't deserve love. Donald Winnicott, the British psychoanalyst, said that a baby needs its mother's gaze to discover itself as human. But what happens when that gaze never arrives? You grow up with no reference for who you are. You don't see yourself reflected in anyone. So, you invent a self that can be loved, and little by little, you distance yourself from your true self. You assume the false self, the performative, silently desperate version that wants only one thing: to be accepted, to be loved. That child grows up and becomes a functional adult, sometimes even an admirable one, but inside carries a hollow. Not a hollow that is visible, but one that is felt, mainly at night, when everything goes silent and the mask begins to slip. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer said that suffering is at the heart of existence, but there is an even crueler suffering than life's natural struggles, that of having learned too early that love is conditional and that simply being you was never enough. And the body remembers, even if the mind tries to forget. Neuroscience shows that the brain of an emotionally neglected child is molded by the lack. The areas linked to self-esteem, empathy, and the sense of security are all affected. It's as if the entire world were a cold place where every step must be calculated, every gesture analyzed, every feeling hidden. And so you start to grow, but you grow hunched over, not physically, emotionally. You apologize for existing. You're great at listening, but terrible at being heard. You feel you must earn every drop of affection you receive. And the most painful thing? You think that's normal. The love you didn't receive in childhood transforms into an obsessive search or a self-imposed isolation. You become someone who takes too much care of others or someone who doesn't allow anyone to get close. You become sensitive to abandonment even when no one is actually leaving. That chapter of life is silent but marked. And maybe now reading this, you feel a lump in your throat. Perhaps you recognize that familiar coldness, that hazy memory, that ancient void that never had a name. And that's okay. The void doesn't define you, but it needs to be seen, acknowledged, embraced. Because as long as the child within you keeps believing they are unworthy of love, all your relationships will only be attempts to correct something that wasn't your fault to begin with. This is not a chapter of accusation towards your parents. It is a chapter of rescue, because understanding that you were not loved as you needed is not ingratitude, it is lucidity. And maybe, just maybe, this is the first step to finally loving yourself as you always deserved. Now tell me, have you ever felt that the biggest obstacle is not outside, but inside your mind? Sometimes the problem is not what happens, but how you interpret it, how you react, and how you sabotage yourself. There is a technique that helps reorganize your thought patterns and gives you a structure for making conscious decisions based on logic, clarity, and internal values. It combines elements of applied philosophy with modern neuroscience and practical self-awareness exercises. Many people who were trapped in cycles of anxiety, procrastination, or impulsivity finally manage to take control of their mind by applying this process. We've left a complete video with all the details on our website. If you want to understand how it works, scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description or the first pinned comment. Childhood passes, but its marks do not have an expiration date. When a child grows up without love, without the warmth of a constant emotional presence, they don't simply forget it. They adapt. They learn to survive where they should have learned to trust. And that silent, invisible, persistent adaptation becomes a second skin, a way of being in the world. What happens is that absent love doesn't disappear over time. It hides, it camouflages itself in the way you relate to others and to yourself. What was absence turns into vigilance. What was silence turns into anxiety. What was inattention turns into hypersensitivity. And suddenly, without quite knowing when it started, you find yourself living in a state of alert, even in moments of peace. You become an adult, but it's as if your nervous system got stuck at some point in childhood, waiting for the next abandonment. And the worst part is that in many cases, you don't even realize you're trapped in that cycle. You just think that relationships are difficult, or that no one understands you, or that maybe you are too complicated. But the truth is deeper and more moving. You are not difficult. You were conditioned. Conditioned not to trust, not to expect care, not to lower your guard. Because at some point, still very young, you discovered that love could be absent and that waiting for it was too dangerous. And there's the trap. You long for love deeply, but the fear is greater. Fear of opening up and being ignored. Fear of needing and being abandoned. Fear of showing who you are and being rejected once again. So, you protect yourself, you close off, or in an inverse move, you give too much, trying to ensure the other person stays. You begin to measure your worth by the intensity of the connections you manage to maintain, even if it costs you your mental health, your identity, your peace. Carl Jung said that what we do not face in ourselves, we will meet as destiny. And those childhood wounds, if not embraced, become magnets for relationships where the story repeats itself. You feel invisible, rejected, insufficient. Not because you consciously choose it, but because your mind, seeking familiarity, tries to repeat the same script with the unconscious hope of finally changing the ending. But that rarely happens, and every new rejection, every new abandonment, confirms that old belief of the unloved child. I am unworthy. But here is a truth that needs to be said with kindness and firmness. You are not unworthy. You were too small to understand that the love you lacked said more about others than about you. You simply didn't know yet. That pain you feel, that difficulty trusting, that urge to control everything around you are not flaws. They are scars. Scars from a childhood where you had to be strong too soon and for too long. That's why many adults who weren't loved in childhood have difficulty resting emotionally. Calm scares them. Affection seems suspicious. Tranquility seems like the prelude to a blow. And that's exhausting. It's exhausting to always live on edge, always alert, always expecting love to turn into pain. But there is something powerful in recognizing it. Because when you understand that this anxiety, this restlessness, this desperate search for acceptance have ancient roots, you stop blaming yourself and finally begin to heal. You no longer have to repeat that story. You can write a new one. But for that, it is first necessary to look at those wounds with eyes of compassion, not judgment. To understand that what you feel is not weakness, it is emotional memory, and that every wound, when named and cared for, begins to lose the power to direct your life. If you have made it this far, perhaps you are already feeling something different, a slight relief, or perhaps a sadness that seemed forgotten. Both are signs that something inside you is beginning to move, and that movement is the start of transformation. Many people who grew up without enough love in childhood become the strong ones in adulthood. They are those who don't ask for help, who solve everything alone, who seem to always be fine. They are often seen as independent, resilient, reliable, but behind that image is something much more delicate, a child who learned that showing need was dangerous. That behavior does not arise from genuine strength. It arises from defense, from the fear of being rejected, ignored, or invalidated. When a child does not find an emotionally present adult in childhood, they understand that dependency is risky. So instead of becoming someone who trusts, they become someone who endures. That adaptation, although necessary for survival, transforms into armor. And the problem with armor is that although it protects, it also isolates. People who live like this have difficulty accepting affection, opening up, or relaxing in the presence of others. They don't know how to rest emotionally because they are always on alert, not by choice, but because the body and mind were trained to anticipate pain before it arrives. Many call this premature maturity or being a responsible child, but it is actually a stolen childhood, a period in which the child, instead of playing and receiving care, had to assume a role that was not theirs. And that role is carried into adulthood with all its consequences. Relationships become a challenge. When someone shows affection, the first reaction may be distrust. The doubt arises. Why are they being kind to me? What does this person want in return? It's as if affection were a threat, not a comfort. This affects friendships, marriages, family relationships, and more profoundly, it affects the way the person sees themselves. Outwardly, there is competence. Inwardly, there is scarcity. Outwardly, there is control. Inwardly, there is insecurity. But everything is very well hidden, even from the person themselves. This is the cruelest point of this armor. It is mistaken for identity. The person believes they are naturally cold or that they don't like contact, when in reality they are just protecting wounded parts that never had a safe space to exist. It is not uncommon for people like this to become caregivers. They are always available to others, even if they are exhausted. They feel guilty about setting boundaries. They have difficulty saying no. And the worst part is they feel they have no right to ask for what they need, as if any emotional need were an excess. Over time, this takes a toll. The person can become emotionally unwell, develop anxiety crises, depression, or simply live with the feeling that they are always indebted to the world. All this because they learned from a very young age that the simple fact of existing was not enough to deserve love. But that armor is not definitive. It can be understood, reframed, and little by little set aside. This requires courage, of course, because abandoning the armor means feeling again, trusting again, allowing yourself to be vulnerable again. And for someone who has spent their entire life protecting themselves, that seems too risky. Little by little, however, it is possible to build a new way of being, one that does not depend on rigidity, but on authenticity. One where strength does not mean denying pain, but the capacity to face it without losing tenderness. Where self-love stops being a distant theory and becomes a daily practice, accepting help, asking for affection, recognizing that being human also means needing. And when that begins to happen, something changes. Relationships become lighter, the body relaxes, the mind slows down, because it is no longer necessary to defend yourself all the time, because a safe space finally exists. Even if that space has been built within yourself, there comes a time when you can no longer run away. The pain begins to filter through the cracks of the routine. The fatigue is no longer physical, it is existential, and the masks, no matter how well adjusted, can no longer hide the void that insists on appearing when everything goes silent. For those who grew up without enough love, the healing process does not begin with grand revelations. It begins with small perceptions, simple things. Noticing that you sabotage yourself when someone approaches, that you feel uncomfortable receiving affection, that you praise others easily but freeze when the compliment is for you. That is the moment the penny drops. You are not simply being difficult or introspective. You are following an old script written by a child who only wanted to feel safe. Restarting in this context is rewriting that script. And that is not done with cliches or forced optimism. It is done with presence, with truth, with the sincere willingness to look at yourself without judgment, to understand that it was not you who failed. It was the environment that did not know how to welcome you. From that understanding, something changes. You begin to treat yourself with more compassion. Instead of criticizing yourself for being needy, you recognize that you are dealing with a legitimate deficiency, the result of years without receiving the basic, consistent emotional affection. And that compassion changes everything. It allows you to stop chasing love as if it were a prize and start building love as if it were a foundation. This involves learning to trust, but trusting in this case not others, but yourself. Trusting that you can feel sadness without sinking, that you can love without losing yourself, that you can fail without abandoning yourself. Science shows that the brain is plastic. It can change, and the same nervous system that learned to live on alert can be re-educated to live in security. This doesn't happen overnight, but it happens with every new, safe, respectful experience. Your body understands. It's different now. Perhaps that begins with a true friendship, perhaps with a therapist, perhaps in a solitary dawn where for the first time you embrace your pain instead of running from it. The how does not matter. The commitment to continue does. You no longer need to pretend you don't feel. You don't need to be strong all the time. You don't need to prove your worth. You can rest. You can be. You can exist without apologizing for it. That restart is silent but powerful. It transforms the way you look at yourself in the mirror, how you position yourself in relationships, how you choose who to walk with. It allows you to say no without guilt, to stop repeating patterns, and finally start living consciously. And perhaps the most beautiful thing of all is that, by healing, you begin to offer others what you never had, not out of obligation, but out of overflow. You become the adult that your child needed, and that in itself is a daily miracle. The absence of love in childhood is not a wound that simply heals over time. It molds, instructs, and shapes the lens through which you see the world, others, and above all, yourself. But the fact that something was learned does not mean it cannot be unlearned. The beliefs you carry of being undeserving, of being a burden, of having to prove your worth, were not born with you. They were absorbed in a context where love was scarce, conditional, or confusing. And everything that was learned in an environment of pain can be reframed in an environment of consciousness. You are not condemned to repeat the same story. You no longer have to live under the logic that love must be earned. You can rest, you can be seen, you can be cared for, and above all, you can learn to love yourself not as a forced exercise in self-esteem, but as a profound form of reconnection with who you always were before the pain. Loving yourself in this context is not a destination. It is a path, a return home, a rescue of the inner child who one day believed they were not worth feeling. Today you know, you always were. And perhaps the greatest sign of healing is not becoming someone without scars, but someone who has learned to touch those scars with tenderness. You know, while I was writing this script, I remembered a specific night, one of those that arrive with a silence heavier than usual. I was alone in my room after an apparently ordinary day, but inside I felt a void that I didn't even know how to name. I took an old photo. I must have been about 5 years old, and looking at that big-eyed child, I realized something. He was still waiting for someone to come for him, not physically, but emotionally. Someone to say, "I see you, I hear you, you matter." In that instant, I understood that maybe no one was going to show up the way he expected, but that didn't mean he was lost. It meant that now, with the maturity the years gave me, I could go back for him with words, with gestures, with compassion, and above all, with more conscious decisions. It was then that I realized, all of us, in some way, are trying to save that little one who lives inside us. And every time someone watches a video like this, every time a reflection touches the depth of the soul, it's as if one more door opens in that search for reconciliation with who we were and who we can still be. If you have made it this far, I want to thank you deeply for staying, for listening, for allowing this conversation to exist between us. Maybe you have no idea how much your presence here matters, but it matters a lot. Oh, and don't forget to click the link in the description or the first pinned comment if you want to access the complete content about the self-transformation model that combines neuroscience and practical philosophy and helps you develop discipline, mental clarity, and a real direction for your life. And look, now that you are already emotionally moved, perhaps with your eyes a little watery, or pretending it's just allergies, do this content creator a favor. Like the video, comment below what touched you the most, and if you still haven't subscribed, I'm going to pretend I didn't see it, but correct that, okay? And about the videos that are appearing on the screen now, let's just say that one of them might touch a part of your history that you didn't even know was hidden. But I won't give any spoilers. Go discover it yourself. I only warn you. After watching it, you won't be the same. See you there or inside you, where it all began.